I am Nathan Grant. A few years ago, after graduating from college, I moved into a modest studio apartment in downtown Seattle. It wasn't much, just a single room on the top floor of a 3-story building. Rent was cheap, and it was only a few blocks from the bar where I worked nights. At 24 and broke, I didn't have many choices. The room was simple: one bed, one kitchenette, one bathroom, and one window that faced a narrow alley. Across that alley stood another building, nearly a twin to mine. The space between us was so tight you could probably toss a crumpled paper across and hit the opposite wall. During the day, the alley was gloomy. At night, it was pure black. Still, I didn't think much of it. Working the late shift meant I usually got home around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd heat up leftovers, scroll through my phone, and eventually drift off. One night, not long after I moved in, I came home, tossed my keys on the counter, and flipped on the light. That's when I noticed something. A flicker in the window across the alley. Just a brief shift, like a curtain being drawn quickly. I stared at it for a few seconds. Nothing moved. No light inside. Just a still, dark square. I figured I was imagining things and brushed it off. Maybe it was wind, or someone being startled by my light coming on. But the next night, it happened again. Only this time, I was sure. As soon as my lights turned on, the curtain on the opposite window moved, slightly. I saw a hand, just for a second, pulling it aside. But I couldn't see who it belonged to. The other apartment was pitch black, completely unlit. What really unnerved me was that I'd never seen any signs of life in that unit. Not once had the lights been on. I assumed it was empty. Over the next few days, I began paying closer attention. And every night, like clockwork, the curtain would shift the moment my lights came on. It wasn't random. It was watching me. I ran a few experiments. I left the lights off one night and just sat in the dark, waiting. Nothing happened. But the instant I flipped on even the smallest lamp, the curtain stirred. That's when the fear settled in. I asked my landlord if anyone was living in that unit. He told me flatly it had been vacant for months. No new tenants. No keys given out. When I insisted, he chuckled and said maybe I was watching too many horror movies. But I wasn't. I knew what I was seeing. Someone was in that apartment. And then one night, I came home and found a crumpled note stuck in my doorframe. All it said was, "Hello." My fingers trembled as I read the note again. Just one word, "Hello." Written in shaky pen on torn paper. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, heart thudding. I couldn't ignore the connection. The window. The curtain. The figure. And now this. I looked down the corridor, empty. The building was always quiet, especially this late. But I didn't feel alone. I bolted the door behind me, then went straight to the window and stared out across the alley. The curtain across the way was still. Nothing moved. I watched for what felt like hours, but it never shifted again. Still, I couldn't sleep. At 4 a.m., I packed a bag and called my friend Leo. He lived across town. I didn't give many details, just told him I needed to crash for the night. I grabbed my essentials and left without looking back. The next morning, I returned with Leo and confronted my landlord again, this time with urgency in my voice. I demanded to see the unit across the alley. At first, he brushed me off, but when I mentioned the note and movement in the window, he finally relented. We walked across the lot to the other building. He unlocked the door to the vacant unit and pushed it open. The smell hit me first, dusty and stale. The apartment was clearly untouched. No furniture. No lights. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners. The air was cold and still. I walked ahead into the back room, the one with the window that faced mine. And that's when I saw it. A single metal chair. Positioned perfectly in front of the window. facing my apartment. I felt sick. The chair looked worn. Scrapes on the floor showed it had been dragged back and forth, like someone sitting in it for hours, maybe nights. Watching. The landlord went pale. He swore he had no idea how anyone got in. He insisted the place had been locked since last winter. We called the police. They came and did a sweep. Took fingerprints, photos. But no one had any answers. No signs of forced entry. No personal items left behind. No security footage. Nothing. But I knew what had happened. Someone had been living in that apartment. Watching me every single night. Waiting for me to turn on the lights. The scariest part wasn't just that I'd been watched. It was that whoever it was left me a message. They came to my door. Close enough to touch the handle. And I would have never known, if not for that note. I moved out that same week. It's been 3 years since then. I live in a high-rise now, with blackout curtains and no alley-facing windows. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel eyes on me. And sometimes, when I dream, I still see that chair by the window. Empty. Waiting. I am Ellie Torres, and when I was 13, my family moved to a remote town in Northern California called Redwood Hollow. It was barely on the map, just a few dirt roads, a gas station, and a lot of pine trees. We lived in an old farmhouse surrounded by dense forest. It was beautiful, sure, but also incredibly lonely. The house was built sometime in the 1930s. It had that typical haunted house vibe, sagging floorboards, cracked windows, and an attic I never had the nerve to explore. About 30 feet from our back porch sat a decaying wooden shed. It leaned to one side, half covered in ivy and moss, and looked like it could collapse in the next storm. My dad claimed the shed was just full of junk, old tools and furniture left behind by the previous owner. He kept saying he'd clean it out someday. But he never did. One night in late autumn, I stayed up past my bedtime, reading under the covers with a flashlight. It was just after midnight when I heard our dog, Jasper, barking like mad. Jasper was a mellow golden retriever, sweet and calm. But that night, he sounded wild, angry. I climbed out of bed and peeked through my window. He was outside, facing the shed, barking like he was trying to scare something off. The motion light on the back of the house flickered to life, casting long shadows across the yard. I stared hard into the darkness around the shed but didn't see anyone. The next morning, my dad found boot prints in the dirt between the shed and the porch. Deep ones, like someone had been standing there for a while. He said it was probably a hunter or a hiker who got lost. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Jasper would bark late at night, always in the direction of the shed. And each time, we'd find fresh footprints, leading to the shed, never away from it, to the sound of gravel crunching under someone's footsteps, right outside my bedroom window. I held my breath and didn't move. The steps paused, then slowly moved toward the back of the house. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds just as the motion light came on. And I saw him. A man. Tall. Wearing a filthy, gray trench coat. He was standing perfectly still beside the shed, half hidden in shadow. I couldn't see his face. Just the outline. Then the light flicked off again, and he vanished into the dark. I woke my parents. My dad grabbed his shotgun and went outside, but of course, nothing. Just more fresh boot prints in the dirt. This time, he opened the shed. It was just as he remembered, cluttered and dusty. He added a second lock. Things went quiet for a little while after that. But I knew it wasn't over. A few weeks after that last incident, Jasper went missing. We searched the entire property, called his name through the woods, checked the road, even drove into town in case someone had picked him up. But he was just gone. My heart broke. I'd had Jasper since I was 7. The silence that filled the house after his disappearance was unbearable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring out the window, replaying the image of that man standing by the shed. Something wasn't right. Around 3:15 a.m., I heard it again, the back door creaking open. To the hallway. My dad was already awake. He held his shotgun tightly and gestured for me to stay behind. Together, we edged toward the kitchen. The motion light flicked on outside. There he was again. The same man. Standing by the shed, in the exact same spot as before. But this time, he was holding something. In one hand, he had a long knife. In the other, Jasper's collar. I felt the blood drain from my face. My dad didn't hesitate. He flung the door open and shouted, raising the shotgun. But the man turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing like a shadow into the night. We called the county sheriff. They came quickly, with flashlights and dogs. They searched the woods for hours, but no one was found. Then they checked the shed. What they discovered inside is something I'll never forget. Someone had cleared out the center of the dirt floor. Symbols had been scratched into the ground, strange, twisted shapes I didn't recognize. In one corner, there was a pile of bones. Animal bones, they said. But I didn't believe them. Behind a loose wooden panel, the officers found a small backpack. Inside were objects that didn't belong to us, a cracked watch, a stained scarf, a wallet with ID cards of someone we'd never met. And tucked into the bottom was a notebook. It was filled with pages of gibberish, scribbled symbols, jagged handwriting, and drawings of houses, eyes, and people with their faces blacked out. Some pages had full names written over and over. One of them was mine. The sheriff took everything and told us not to stay there another night. While we packed, I looked out the window one last time. The shed stood quiet, now wrapped in yellow police tape. But just beyond it, at the edge of the tree lean, I swear I saw a figure. A face. Watching. When I blinked, it was gone. I screamed for my dad, who ran to the window with his gun, demanding to know where I saw him. I pointed toward the woods. My dad stormed outside, yelling, firing warning shots into the trees. We left that house the next morning. Moved to the coast, into a neighborhood with neighbors and streetlights. I still think about that shed sometimes. About the man in the coat. About what he was doing before we arrived. And who he might be watching now. In the summer of 2019, my friends and I planned a weekend camping trip to Hollow Creek Forest in Montana. It was me, Trevor, along with Maya, Devin, his younger cousin Liam, and Liam's girlfriend Sophie. We had just finished college and wanted a break from phones, deadlines, and people. We picked a spot deep inside the forest reserve, far beyond where most hikers dared to go. It was a clearing near a shallow lake, surrounded by thick evergreens. There was no cell signal, no power lines, just silence and the occasional rustle of wildlife. We pitched 3 tents, built a fire, and grilled some hot dogs as the sun dipped behind the hills. That first night was calm. The stars were brighter than I'd ever seen. We sat around the fire telling ghost stories and laughing too loud. Everything felt perfect. But on the second night, something changed. It started around 11 p.m. We were sitting around the fire again when Devin stopped mid-sentence and stared toward the trees. He whispered, "Did you guys see that?" We all turned to look, but there was nothing, just shadows between the trees. Devin said he saw someone duck behind a trunk. Liam brushed it off, saying it was probably a deer or raccoon. Still, something about Devin's tone made everyone uneasy. About 20 minutes later, we heard a loud crack, like someone stepping hard on a stick. It came from the same direction. Maya went pale. She said she didn't feel right and wanted to go to bed. We all agreed to call it a night, to my tent and tried to sleep, but the forest had turned oddly quiet. No owls. No crickets. Just a dense, ringing silence. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not close, but not far either, maybe 10 feet from the tent wall. It was slow and raspy, like someone trying to stay quiet. I thought it might be one of the others, but I didn't hear the sound of a stream or footsteps. Just that awful breathing. I held my flashlight but didn't dare turn it on. The breathing circled my tent. I could hear each crunch of dead leaves underfoot. I froze. Every instinct in my body told me not to move. And after what felt like forever, the sound stopped. Eventually, I fell asleep. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. But at breakfast the next morning, Devon looked disturbed. Sophie looked tired and shaken. Then they told us, they had heard it too. Breathing. Footsteps. Sophie even said she thought there was more than one person walking around the tents. We checked the campsite and found tracks circling the tents. But the worst part? One of the prints, deep in the mud, was barefoot. No shoes. No socks. Just bare skin. It didn't feel like a prank. It felt like someone was stalking us. And they were just getting started. That night, none of us wanted to be alone. We sat around a much bigger fire, flashlights clutched tightly, talking in nervous whispers. The usual calm of the forest now felt heavy, like the trees were hiding secrets. Even the smallest sound made us jump. Around 2 a.m., we heard it again, leaves crunching, a branch snapping. But this time, we heard something else too. A voice. It was low, hard to make out, almost like a mumble, or someone speaking to themselves just beyond the tree line. Devon grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. For a second, just a split second, we saw him. A man. Naked. Crouched low behind a tree like some kind of feral animal. His skin looked dirty, almost gray. The moment the light hit him, he darted back into the woods. No one spoke for a long time. We were frozen. Staring into the dark, unsure of what we'd just seen. Sophie wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but Devon and I said it was too dangerous to hike back in the dark. We had no trail lights, and getting lost with someone like that out there felt even worse. So we stayed. No one went back to their tents. We sat together in a tight circle, backs toward the fire, eyes scanning the woods. Time slowed. The fire crackled, flashlights dimmed. At some point, Maya dozed off with her head on my shoulder. And then I heard it again. A snap. Then a whisper. Then the words, clear as day. I see you. It wasn't any of us. I know that for sure. The voice came from the woods, maybe 20 feet away. It was low, calm, and far too close. I was too afraid to say anything. Maybe the others were too. But I knew I wasn't dreaming. And then came the zipper. The zipper on my tent, started to slide down slowly. I sat up and screamed with everything I had. All of us started shouting at once. Flashlights flicked on and flailed in every direction. Whoever it was ran off. I heard crashing branches as they tore through the woods. The tent was open just a few inches. I zipped it shut with trembling hands and didn't sleep a second after that. At dawn, we packed up in total silence. No one joked. No one talked. The hike back was cold and tense, like we were being followed the whole time. At the ranger station, we reported what had happened. The ranger didn't look surprised. He said, "You're not the first to say something like that." We asked what he meant, but he didn't go into detail. On the drive home, we tried to laugh about it. But the truth is, it didn't feel funny. Not then. Not now. That voice, that zipper, the barefoot prints in the dirt, they come back to me every time I close my eyes. And no matter how far I am from those woods, I still sometimes wake up in the dark thinking I hear breathing just outside my window.